card. The blue card will indicate that you have 1 minute. The yellow card will indicate 30 seconds, and the red card will indicate time. Sorry, my screen just shut out on me, so let me reopen that. All right. As we move through those questions, we will be going in the order that was pre-selected to start, and we will rotate. First to respond will be Mike, followed by Risa, then Tim, and then George. Each question cycle will then shift. Second question will be responded to first by Risa, then we will be followed by Tim, and then George, and then Mike. And we will continue that pattern as we move through each question and answer. All right, so your first prompt, the candidates received this prompt in advance. This film concludes with a message that states the system was constructed one decision at a time and maintained by silence. What happens next is up to us. In reflection of what you viewed in this film and in the consideration of the anecdote shared by Kim, please share with us the significance of this statement to you. Please include your core beliefs and how they guide you in each of your decisions that you will make as a board member, and why we should care about racial equity. And you can introduce yourself in this time too. And Mike, you will lead us off.
Great, thanks. I wasn't sure if I was starting it. Okay, so again, I'm Mike Sharp, and I mentioned earlier that I've been a teacher in the district for a long time, and that's where I'm going to start this conversation, is bringing you in with me to the perspective as a teacher. So I have been asked many times in my career to identify kids who are thinking outside the box. There's no real tool to measure such a thing, just my viewpoint, and that's subjective. See, that's the thing. I'm a white male in my 50s. My viewpoint is skewed by what I've experienced, and perhaps even more by what I have never had to experience. So we're going to take a quick example. Let's imagine two kids in my classroom. I teach 4th grade. We're learning a way of multiplication called the area mob. And this one student, a white girl, calls out, says, "This is stupid." And I say, "What? Why do you think so?" So she shows me that she can think of a quicker way to do it, that she can keep some of the numbers in her head, doesn't have to draw out the whole picture. And I say, "Okay, that shows me that she gets it. That's pretty clever." Okay. Now, let's go back in time a little bit. A different girl calls out, a Black girl calls out, "This is stupid." And I have a feeling that she's being disrespectful. So I remind her first that she needs to raise her hand before she calls out. I remind her that we don't like to use that word stupid in class. These are all things we've talked about before. And then I say the same question. "Well, why? Why do you think so?" She shuts down. She says, "No, never mind, forget it." A few minutes later, I find that she's stopped working on the questions altogether. 2 weeks later, I'm asked to identify which kids in my class are thinking outside the box. You see the problem here? Who am I going to identify, right? If you ask me who in my class was potentially being disrespectful or defiant, who am I going to identify there? Now, thankfully, this old white guy in question has a lot of equity training. I'm able to recognize that I have unconscious biases. I'm working actively every day to counter them. But how many teachers are being asked that same question and are blissfully unaware of how they're pigeonholing certain kids? That's the silence that we're talking about. That's the silence that's perpetuating this broken system. All right, so what do? We need to get everybody trained and everyone aware about these racial biases, as well as strategies that we can use to counter them and neutralize them. I think that this drives everything that we need to do on the board in order to close our opportunity gap. It means that we need to re-examine everything with a new lens. And this is where I find that my experience as a teacher is going to be most effective. We've had several well-intentioned programs and initiatives that are often planned, and then there's a part where somebody says, "Well, we'll ask the teachers to do that part." And we are not fully considering that maybe that teacher data may not be totally objective. I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to stop there. But I think that we need to ensure that our board not only sees the potential for bias in situations like that, but also insists on training to overcome it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Risa.
Good evening again. I'm Risa Jenkins, and I'm a parent of 3 children here in our district, and I was born and raised in North Carolina. Just like many of you, I live in these constructed systems in every aspect of my life. It's systemic racism, and it's been constructed over hundreds of years, and it's still being constructed today. Today, this statement, it definitely hit home to me because it's the system that we all live in, we work in, we learn in. And it's even how some people expand it into our culture and how we treat each other or how we're treated. You know, even with all my achievements and accolades I've experienced microaggression like today, intentional actions, and overt racism. And sadly, this is what children of color experience in our schools. And I've spent my life speaking up about these systems. Sometimes I make change. Sometimes I risk my own career and my ability to provide for my family, but I keep doing it fearlessly. It's a living reminder for me, if not me, then who? And I know I share a lot of experiences that are similar to so many of our students and families. And so that's why I'm going to speak up. My core beliefs that guide me in decisions are keeping the goal in mind, that what we're trying to accomplish and the impact of those decisions. You know, our district does have a strategic plan, and it lays out goals for our students, our staff, community, and the organization. And when we're making decisions as a board, we've got to keep our stakeholders in mind. And that starts first with our students. They are why we have schools. So we've got to keep them in mind first. And then it's the staff, because without staff, we won't have anyone to instruct or support our students. And then, of course, our community, because our decisions that we make in our schools impact our greater community. And we have to be intentional with ensuring we hear from a diverse representation from all of these groups. Racial equity is important because we are a diverse society, rich with experiences and opportunities to learn and grow from each other. The reality is, the advances that we have experienced in our society right now is because of these diverse cultures, communities, and societies sharing their art, literature, music, science, and history throughout history. Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Tim.
I want to thank you all for being here, for inviting me, and particularly for putting together that film. And I think it's emblematic of the approach that I would like to take if I'm elected to the school board, which is listening, really, and not just listening, but going out and seeking out, soliciting this feedback and suggestions from the community. Because, I mean, as you can see just from that film, we have a community of people who are uniquely qualified to speak on these issues. And that includes, I mean, as you can see in the film, it includes the students, it includes folks who teach at the university level, it includes even especially teachers and staff at our schools. And really, I want to know a lot more from these folks, because what I'm seeing in some approaches is a kind of, it's a bottom up. You know, we're seeing these pockets of you know, questioning, like, why are we doing this way? And this is the way that it affects me individually. And the school board, unfortunately, works from the top down. So I want to bridge that gap. I want to talk to the people who are actually being affected and who are experiencing the programs that the superintendent, the district administration put together, and how they're implemented. And I want to reach out to them and see, is this working? Where is this working? What is wrong with it? What can we do better? And I think it's really amazing, and it's a great approach that y'all have taken. I want to see more of it. I want to see more from it, and I want to say, I want the school. I would really wish that the current school board members, especially the folks who are going to stay on the board, have seen it. I don't know if y'all have shown it to them already, but it's a fantastic presentation, and to link them up with the folks who obviously had a lot more to say about this than just the 30 minutes that were given. My daughter is in first grade, and she started kindergarten during the pandemic, and she is a little she's a little brown girl, like I was a little brown boy, and she experiences this pretty similar experiences to what I had in school. One thing that surprised me is when she started kindergarten, they started by asking her a bunch of questions. They were placing her. Basically, this is the class that you are going to go into, depending on what I thought were odd questions, such as, can you count to 100 by tens, which seems like something if somebody else who was, I don't know, prepared for that question might have been able to teach her. And it might be something that she might have been able to master or not. Depending on how that she was prepared for it. And I think that seems like a problematic approach. It's just, do you know this already? Which is one of the girls in the film said that, you know, do you already have this knowledge that we believe is important? When that really doesn't speak too much to the child's potential, but rather the foundation that we are looking for, kind of like we are asking, what's your kid's resume? And I think that we could improve upon this. I mean, not just for kindergartners, but for tracking and for ways to decide who gets what. But I want to say that you know, fundamentally, I think that the film was right, that we are splitting off folks and saying that they are more important. You are the person who is going to get into the, you know, the quicker math classes, or you're the person who is going to get into AP classes, and then you're the person who's going to get in college. And then when you're in college, you're going to have all these AP credits and you're going to sail through, and maybe you'll end up in some kind of professional school. And I think that we should be preparing as many students as possible for those experiences, and that we should be looking for their potential regularly. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And George.
Thank you. Courtney, thank you for the centering moment after the film we watched tonight. I think this is the 6th time I've watched it in the last couple of days. And I found myself at the end each time having feelings that were a little different about it. And to Kim and to the audience, I would say, Kim, I really like the personal characters in the film. I feel like every time I watch it, I want to have a conversation with one of the students or the professors or the parents. It was just a very personal, moving film. So thank you. And the way it ended, this system was constructed one decision at a time and maintained by silence. I've just noticed the maintained by silence over and over as I watched it. And you know, I think most of us would agree right now, the system we're in just simply is not working. The system was built by white people. As Dr. Sherrick Hughes said in the film, it was literally on the backs of Black people. I mean, quite literally. It has served white people well. So there's been, I think, very little real willingness or effort to want to change it. And my own coming to this understanding has really been from a lifetime of experience. Not something someone made me do. You know, as a white person, though, you know, I was taught a white history growing up in the 50s and 60s in public school. As was said in the film, we're not doing something right, and why. No, I don't presume to have the answers, but I'm at a point in my life where I have the understanding, the passion, the commitment to really make some structural changes that would truly benefit all students. I want to tell just a quick story. When I was a teacher at Phillips Middle School, I was a special education teacher. I was a veteran teacher, and I'd been out of the classroom 15 years and was coming back. And my first couple days there, I was introduced to my class, and it was 13 students and 12 were Black. It was a self-contained class for students with behavior problems. When the bell rang for class, the kids hung out in the hallway. Then they ran in after the bell. And I quickly learned that they were doing that because they were embarrassed for their peers to see them be in special education class. As I talked to them, they also were very despairing of the fact they'd been in it for years. They didn't see a way out. So I went around and met the teachers at Phillips real quickly, figured out who would be willing to work with them, and offered the students each a plan to get them into regular classes, literally next Monday, if they would work a deal with me, and that is that they would take care of themselves or get them out of class if they started getting in trouble. And so we set it up, and pretty soon we had all the students in 2 to 4 classes a day. I got in a little trouble with school administration because I hadn't done the IEP properly and the paperwork. But I was able to go ahead and do that later because I had worked with the parents and gotten this arrangement set up. And I offer this story as that's sort of my style, is to go ahead and break the rules and do something different, and let's get some results for the kids. And I think that's where I am as a board member. We have got to stop what we're doing, just stop it and do some new things. I don't want to be presumptuous. I know it'll affect a lot of people, so we'll do it graciously. Thank you.
Thank you all for your thoughtful responses. So the next question for you all is, upon our initial screening of I'm Smart 2, participants shared a sense of powerlessness in addressing the historical harms and systemic inequities that they've observed. Unfortunately, amongst this sense of powerlessness is our youth, who are sometimes left without guidance, support, or advocacy in addressing the issues that interfere with their learning. Too often, when decisions are made, the voices of our young people are overlooked or discounted entirely. As a board member, how will you ensure that youth voices are infused in your decision-making processes? And Risa, you can begin.
And it goes back to my response on the first one is looking at who our stakeholders are. And our first stakeholders are our students. That's it. First and foremost, that's why our schools are here. So obviously we want to go and talk to our students. And this has been a lot of the work that I've done in the district. And I'm not going to completely say the district hasn't done it. The district is improving. And I know they are setting up advisory councils that have students in it. I know some of the task force that I've served on, we've advocated to hear more from the students. So I know some of that work is happening, but we've got to do more because our students are the ones who are receiving these services. They're the ones in the classroom. They're the ones experiencing what's happening in our schools. So we have to be intentional. We have our school improvement teams in our schools. We need to make sure where it's age appropriate. Obviously, it's still challenging in the elementary schools to have some of the younger grades, but when it's age appropriate for the upper elementary, middle school, and high school, we've got to make sure those student representatives on our school improvement teams are present. Okay, because the school improvement teams, they're making decisions, they're discussing things that are happening in their schools. Also, I want to take another step back because something that I've brought to the district's attention is we say we're using the racial equity impact assessment toolkit, and I've seen how it's used. And we need to have more training on how to use it properly, because the very first step is understand who your stakeholders are. So that's another critical thing that we need to be doing in our decision making. Look, if we're saying we're using the racial equity impact assessment toolkit in our district, we have to use it properly. And obviously the first step is going to our students. And so circling back, again, we can have advisory councils, which I know our current superintendent is doing. And as board members, we should be engaging and interacting with our students. You know, they have student government, there's student organizations in the school and clubs. And so just like board members serve as liaisons for the parents, parent groups, board members should be going and sitting in on some of these student-run organizations that we have in our schools and listening to them and hearing what their experiences are, why these clubs exist, who are in these clubs, who are engaging in them and things like that, because it will be eye-opening for us as board members to see what that looks like and why certain spaces and places are opportunities for some students and challenges and barriers for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Risa. Tim?
I think that this is one of the more fundamental questions that we have at hand, is that it's not easy to get in touch with the school board. It's not easy to get in touch with the administration, and it kind of depends on, we don't know who the right person is to, I mean, I say this as a parent of a 6-year-old. I don't always know who the best person is to talk to about any given issue. I don't know who to email. I don't know who to reach out to. The emails that I get are one way. They don't have a reply to. They are all no reply emails. If I click the reply button, it goes nowhere. And so I think this is a fundamental problem with the school board and the district administration. If I get an email from the superintendent, from the principal, and I respond back to it, I don't know if it goes anywhere or if anybody's listening for it. We all get robocalls every week, and that's the definition of one-way communication. And I think that this is one of the fundamental questions: is how can we be more collaborative? And I don't think it is that complicated. I think that technology today has made it so much easier to keep in touch, to speak together, to collaborate, to discuss issues that are important to us. And I think one of the major benefits of it is that we can all have we can do it on our own schedule. I think that's one of the great things about the internet, as opposed to a timed meeting that happens every third Wednesday that only some folks know about, and we don't necessarily have room for somebody to make a comment if they're not involved. I mean, I've been to school board meetings and you get 3 minutes and you don't have a discussion, you just get 3 minutes to talk. And we know they're listening, but we're not, exchanging feedback. I might be saying something, or a commenter might be saying something to them that they're doing already. And I think it's a great idea, and I just don't know what's happening. So I think we have the same issue speaking with students, really, and students speaking to the board and the administration, is that it is not that hard to include them, but we have to want to do it. The folks on the top have to want to do it. And I have probably said this so often on these various forums that even if I lose, I'm sure the folks who are listening, who've been to all these forums with me, are hearing that too, is that it is so hard to feel like you have been heard. And that we can definitely work on this. We can do more than all right, thanks. We can do more, we can do better.
Thank you, Tim. George?
Thank you. Had to get myself unmuted there. Listening to students, it's like listening to anybody at one level. And that is that often we listen and then we just go do what we've always been doing. And I'm as guilty of that as the other person. While we were doing this, I pulled up the Campaign for Racial Equity's Excellence with Equity report from 6 years ago. It's full of anecdotes from students, parents, teachers. I want to just real quickly read a couple comments from what are checked in the column here as students of color, particularly these are from brown students. My guidance counselor tried to change my courses when I chose AP classes. I know what I want to learn, but the counselor said she wasn't happy with my schedule and she kept trying to change it to make me take less challenging classes. She told me I couldn't take 2 AP courses. I took them anyway. In a Spanish class, when the teacher was taking attendance and Carlos wasn't there, the teacher asked, did he drop out already? It was said in front of the whole class. Teachers think because we are Latinos, we drop out. The report is full of stories from kids. So if we're really going to listen to them, we need to do something about what they're saying, not just acknowledge that they said it. And that's where the rub comes. And that's where I am at this point with the school board. We really don't need to talk that much about what the problem is. We need to talk about what these solutions are going to be. And that may be some painful discussions. And I'm not criticizing the board for that. There are people on the board that are dealing with these issues. We're just not getting the results we want. And so, my career has been honestly listening to kids. That was my training, was how to listen to kids so you can get them to assume responsibility for their own behavior. There are ways to do that. And kids will tell you the truth every time if you listen to them. And so, I want us to certainly do that, but I also want us to listen to everybody. I don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again, but they're telling us. I looked at the SRO task force videos from last year. We're getting clear pictures that a lot of students are affected by SROs in our schools. Well, we need to listen to that because they have a different experience than other people do. And if we're really going to change something, then we're going to have to make some changes so that the students are heard. And that may be painful for some of the adults to have to make those changes. So I appreciate that. My 3 minutes seem to go way faster than everybody else's, but thank you.
Yes, the 3 minutes are fast. That is also what audience members get at the board meetings. It goes by quickly, but thank you for that response. Mike?
Okay, so talking about bringing in youth voice. So years ago in our district, I'm going to say 10 years ago, there was an effort that we interviewed middle and high school students of color to try to find out what they saw teachers who they considered successful in reaching them. So what things did they see that teachers were doing well that helped to bring them in? Okay, and it was a fantastic list of things. They boiled it down to 6 different things that we called the student 6. Okay, because it was from the students. Here's the 6 things that everyone in staff should be working on. In my memory, this came from Greg Meyer. I don't know if he was the origin of it or not, but he's the one who presented it to my staff for the first time, so that's why I've been associated with him. And so we were really excited about it. It mentioned things like discussing racial dynamics openly, making connections to student lives, both finding out more about their lives, but also making connections for the things that we're learning and how that would affect potential jobs that they might have, or how it might affect what they see happening in their neighborhoods, many ways to connect to their lives. And also engaging students' culture, which requires us as teachers to, find out more about their cultures and get to know them better and develop better relationships with them. This is the kind of work that we need to continue. So in my experience, that initiative, although in my opinion, was fantastic, it sort of dropped off. And it might have been because conversations were getting uncomfortable. I know that in my school, there were other priorities that showed up at the faculty meetings, and these things kind of got pushed aside, which is a whole other story in itself. Okay. So this summer, I was reading an article about a group called Integrate NYC, and they were talking about ways to integrate, better in the New York City school system, and they interviewed high school students, and they came up with a list that sounded remarkably like our Student 6, and it made me long for it again. So this is my push to try to get us doing this again. Their list, I've got it written down here. They called it the 5 R's, and they said we need to reform resources, relationships, restorative justice, and representation. I'm sorry, thank you. And it's so similar to the things that we were working on. So I think that we as a board, we need to remind each other about this commitment, that we need to focus on these values. We need to make sure that students are aware that we got them from them in the first place, and that we are listening.
Thank you for that response. So we will now be moving into answering or asking the questions that we received from our audience prior in their registration. Tim, you will lead us, followed by George, then Mike, and then Risa, all right? So first question is, as individuals, we are all at different points in our anti-racism awareness and work. Do you feel it is imperative that as board members, each of you engage in anti-racist leadership training in order to support a district that has committed to being intentional about this work? If not, how do you propose to be effective as a board member without being intentional about your own anti-racist and equity lens? As a follow-up, are you in support of using tools such as the Racial Equity Impact Assessment so that board members engage in race-centered data decisions to ensure equitable decisions are made?
Okay. So let me start this off by saying I went to law school when I was 33 years old. So I understand fundamentally that I do not know everything. I do not know most things. What I know is like, I don't know, 0.001% of the knowledge in the whole world. I don't know most other people's experiences, and I am not even from North Carolina. I grew up in Houston, Texas, in the suburbs, and it was a very different experience to grow. I mean, frankly, when I moved here in 2010, it was a culture shock. Things are so different here, and so yes, no question, I would sign up for the training, yes, and I would be happy to be part of it. And I would love to learn. I am still learning more all the time about how to oppose racism and how to improve racial equity in our community and in the country at large. And there was this like, so yes, I'm all in for the training. Let's do it. And I am still, always trying to find something new to read so I can learn more about this country and its history. And I really liked, there was a sort of historical approach to the video that I just watched, and that taught me something. I would love to learn more about the history of Chapel Hill, because I certainly don't know everything about that. As far as using the tools that you mentioned, I don't know what it is. So it's another thing that I would have to learn about. It's not something that I would be too skeptical of, considering the organization that I assume has provided it. So I think it would be a good idea on both counts. Yes. I don't know if I still have any more time, but somebody asked a question about whether we should dump tracking altogether. And I think we should consider it. I understand a lot of people are invested in the system, and maybe their kids are already in it, maybe students are invested in it as well. I don't know the best way to go about changing things that are already in place. And I don't know if this is the best answer, if this is the best method to go about it. It seems like we should be, like I said before, including as many students as possible. George said something a couple of weeks ago in a forum that, you know, these teaching tactics, they translate. And they're not that hard to implement in the general sense. Well, not that hard for an individual teacher, but who knows about a whole school district. But anyway, that was my answer to that. We should definitely at least have a discussion about what we are going to do about this program, why it is good, why it is bad. Thanks.
I think it's my turn next. Great.
Yes, thank you.
So the first question was, would I be willing to participate in anti-racist leadership training? The answer is absolutely yes. I would look forward to that. And would I be agreeable, I think is how it was asked, about using the racial impact equity assessment tool in the work we do? And the answer is yes, absolutely yes. I wanted to share a related experience related to the question. About 20 years ago, I was on the faculty at North Carolina Central University in the School of Education. Actually became a department chair there. And we began as a faculty to study critical race theory and what it was and how it might impact our teacher training and administrator training programs and how we might use it. As a part of that, I started becoming aware of my own white privilege, my white male privilege, in a way that I really had never before happened. And I wrote an op-ed piece for the News and Observer, and I actually have it sitting on my computer here because I wanted to read a paragraph or two and then I'll be quiet from it. This was 20 years ago. White male privilege has allowed me to benefit from a system that fails others different from myself, but has allowed me to delude myself into thinking I've achieved everything in my life as a result of hard work. And one last paragraph. It's very uncomfortable to even write this. The system has allowed me to get good jobs, make a good living, have some fun along the way. It has never required me to really look at myself and the inherent power structures in terms of minority student achievement. It certainly never really required any significant behavioral change. The focus has usually been on the problem children, problem families, and problem communities. And I find that that's still the case 20 years later, that we spend a lot of time focusing on the kids as if they're the problem when it's our system, in fact, that is creating the just giant mess we're in when it comes to racial equity. So thank you. I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you. Mike?
Right, thanks. I'm starting my own timer as well. The opportunities that I've had as a teacher to take racial equity training have been transformative. I think George was saying something very similar just a minute ago. And I would absolutely welcome further training, in equity leadership as well. I think that would be fantastic. I think it's a great idea for anyone on the board to be doing that. I'm a big proponent of getting more racial equity training across the board in our schools to try to help us address some of these issues that we talked about. I've already mentioned a couple of times about unconscious biases, and I was brave enough to admit that I might have them myself, and we all do, and it's important to recognize these biases and how they might affect us. In talking about using something like the racial equity impact assessment, I think those are specific assessments like that are specifically designed to help us avoid problems that might occur because of our own biases. And so we're asking us to step outside of just making normal decisions and instead use a tool that's going to guide us through the steps of trying to get rid of biases as much as possible so that we can make the best decision for everyone who's involved. So I would support all of the parts of that question full-heartedly. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Risa?
Yes, to answer the question affirmatively, yes, I would support our board going through racial equity, anti-racist leadership training. Um, so my career in this space of diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racist training, racial awareness training has been going on for years for me and a lot of the work that I do. I currently serve on the board for North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, an industry organization where our industry is underrepresented by people of color. And so on that board, I serve as the chair for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. And so our organization and our board came together, and our organization decided to offer an opportunity to have the board and any staff member or anyone affiliated with the organization to go through training. And so obviously it costs money. But I said, this is important to me. And sadly, I went to the company I work for and asked, and it wasn't a priority. So I made it my own priority. And so I'll be taking training for the next 4 months in school again, because it's important that even though I am a person of color, I still need to go through the training too. I'm always going to learn something new. So I would support the board going through the training, and I'd happily go through even more training. Even beyond the current training that I've gone through, I've held leadership roles in other areas of equity in the industry that I work in other spaces and personally. And so I'm constantly watching training videos and just everything about racial equity and being anti-racist, because it's so important. It impacts every part of my life. It impacts every part of my children's lives and other children's lives who look like me and my children. I know our district says it uses the racial equity impact assessment toolkit, but I have to say, as a longtime volunteer, that we have to do better. I think we might arrive at different decisions that may have been made if we truly use the racial equity impact assessment toolkit better. I've seen it in action and actually said, this is not the right way to use the toolkit. And questioned it as well. And so saw the results of some of the decisions as well. So what I would say is, yes, we should be using it, but we need to be using it properly. We probably need, I know there was some recent training with Race Forward, the organization who developed the racial equity impact assessment toolkit. But new board members, we need to understand how to do it and go through that training with Race Forward. And I think all staff need to go through it so they understand how to utilize that toolkit, and obviously any other racial equity or equity assessment toolkits that the district uses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to take questions from the audience today. The first question we have in Q&A is from Ms. Naya Farrington. Would you like to ask your question live? If so, you can unmute your mic now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Naya. I graduated from Carborough High in 2018, and I'm currently a student at Howard, as well as a member of the Chapel Hill community. So my question is, as an alumni of the district, I've seen school board members come and go, yet the achievement gap still exists in our district. So could you all please talk about a tangible action you would implement with a seat on the board? And with that, how do you plan to engage Black students in that process and in your decision-making overall with a seat on the board?
Thank you. Right.
Who's first? Me? Okay, yeah. I thank you for the questions. Two things came to mind. One was the inordinate out-of-school suspension rate of predominantly Black students. And we're going to need, as a board member, we're going to need to revisit the code of conduct and how it's used. The suspension rates are actually worse than they have been in the last 5 years, according to the most recent data. That's troubling. So that's one area to look at. The other one I was hoping we might get into tonight relates to academically gifted and the whole program of early identification of bright students and the impact that has on starting our tracking system in grades, well, actually in kindergarten, but grades 1, 2, 3 by 3rd grade, we're picking them. We simply need to take the beliefs and the way academically gifted classrooms are run and the emphasis on success and spread that into the classrooms everywhere. I got the plan out. It's 50 pages long. It's small print. It's very hard to read the plan. I read carefully through it. But the interesting thing was on the first page, the second page, it starts off with, we believe gifted learners need opportunities to challenge and inspire them to grow academically, intellectually, socially, and emotionally. Well, I think we believe all students need that. And I'm surprised it's in there. It says we need advocates who recognize them, value them, and passionately support them. I think all students need those advocates. We need time during the school day to explore their giftedness. We need time during the school day for every student to explore their giftedness. And this needs to be the focus in our general instruction program. We need instruction that enables them to achieve at least 1 year of growth for 1 year of schooling. That's not rocket science. That's what we want for all students. And the belief system that's in here is translatable to all students. The report even says what they do to translate it to all students. The problem is, and I'm not blaming AIG people, I'm blaming us, all of us collectively, for allowing the system to continue. What they do just isn't working because by 3rd grade, we've started tracking students and we end up with an inordinate number of white students in the programs, and other kids get shunted off into classrooms where, quite frankly, there's sometimes lesser expectation for performance. And those are things the board is going to have to look at and start to make some real changes before we're going to see some real results. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mike.
Thanks. Thank you, Naya, for your question. From what I understand, you had 2 parts to it, that you wanted to know about some changes that we would make on the board to help with the opportunity gap, but also in listening to student voice. And one area where I can think of where both of those are happening is when we think of if we look back at the film, we think of the early identity issues that kids are having. The girl are telling her mom that, she thinks that Black boys are misbehaving all the time, things like that. Or the girl who felt like, she was learning really quickly that she was not someone who was good at math. And so as teachers, we've been focused for many years on a way of teaching called the growth mindset. And this is the idea that people are not just born smart, that you can always improve what you know, you can continue to grow, and that we don't tend to say, oh, I can't do that. We would prefer to say, I don't know how to do that yet. And the yet is the biggest part of that. So we want students to feel that they will be successful and that we just need to figure out the best plan and the best avenue to get them there. And I feel like having students and staff that are all in line with this, with knowing that everyone, can be growing and everyone can be learning, it kind of then leads itself to the other question about identifying kids for gifted, and is that really necessary at this point if we are feeling like we've embraced the idea that everyone can achieve and we just need individualized paths for how they're going to be. I do think that another important part of the representation, that self-image problem is the diversity of our staff. We need more representation because kids need to see people who look like them in positions of authority, in positions of guidance. And they need to see that that's something that they can become, because then they're less likely to think, oh, Black kids are not good at math, for example. You know, they see a math teacher, they're like, well, clearly Mr. Jones is great at math, so, you know, what's going on here? So I feel like all of those things can help all of our students develop a more positive identity about who they are. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Lisa.
Yes, hi. Naya, thank you for that question. And I'm also a Howard alum, so HU, Mecca. So this is a great question. How do we tangibly close this achievement gap? Something that's been around for a long time, a system that was created intentionally, okay? And first, it's something that, like I said, I serve on the board for North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, and we've been trying to identify how we address some of the equity and access issues within our organization for communities of color. And so one thing we need to do is take a look at all of our programs, our policies, and even how our organization is run, and look at it through an equity lens. We can run through it using the racial equity assessment toolkit or some other equity assessment toolkit and basically say, is this program accessible? Is it equitable for all students, especially our students of color, especially our programs that say they're closing the achievement gap, especially our programs that could benefit more students than the handful of students who are in it. So that's what we should first do. And I think that's going to open a lot of eyes in terms of how these programs are administered, who's accessing it, and what that access looks like. Then we want to look at our policies. And I know George and some other people have shared, like the code of conduct. And this is something that I brought to the board's attention and the staff's attention when the code of conduct was recently revamped. And it still had some questionable material and actions in it. It still had suspending elementary age children, which bothered me to my core. It seemed like it missed an opportunity to really get at the heart of what was going on with our students because of the adults who were suspending them. Okay. And so it would be not just that policy, but then other policies in terms of how students can enroll into advanced placement classes and things like that, because there's a whole system. And it's interesting that there's some parents who know it quite well, and then there's a lot of parents who don't. So what are those policies and access looks like? And last is operations. And I think this group has touched on it a little bit in terms of what does our organization look like? If students can't see themselves in areas of leadership in our schools, in our community, then how can they believe that they can achieve it too? And we've got a lot of wonderful people of color who can serve in leadership roles, not just in our district office, but in our classrooms, in our schools, supporting them as teachers' assistants. So that's important. We need to look at our organization as a whole, our policies and our programs through the Racial Equity Impact Assessment Toolkit and other assessment toolkits. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tim?
Thanks, Naya, for your question. I think that the number one substantive approach that I would push, that I would want to make happen as much as possible, is improving increasing the capacity of our early childhood education programs, and I mean pre-K. You probably heard from the mother in the film that, you know, even at the kindergarten level, teachers expected things, or seemed to expect things, from children, that these are things that they would have learned in preschool. And the reason, there are a lot of reasons why kids may or may not go into pre-K or not. One of the big ones is that you can't get in, you can't afford it. There's currently a push for federal funding in the Build Back Better Act, which used to be called the American Families Plan before. increase the funding for Head Start, because right now, if you want to get into Chapel Hill Carver District Pre-K, you either qualify based on income, or you throw your hat into a lottery. And then once you're in the lottery, you have to pay for the pre-K services. So obviously there are more families that want this service than there are services available. And I think that federal funding, if Congress ever gets its act together, and I know that there is movement in the state funding section, because I just saw Governor Cooper had expanded funding for that, that we need to, grab a hold of these funds and use it to expand this, because scientists have known for over 20 years now that this is one of the big unifying forces, because children between the ages of 0 and 5, their brains are sponges, and they are not just sitting there, staring at the ceiling or whatever. They are taking in everything that is going on. And at the age of 2, your kid should be in preschool. And a lot of people think, well, I am a bad parent if my kid is in preschool. And I understand that, because that's how I felt when my kid was in preschool. That I do not have the time to set aside to keep my kid at home and take care of them personally. But I decided to go to law school, and my wife was working, and that's the decision we made. And I had no idea until she actually went through the program how beneficial it would have been for her. And so I think we need to sell parents on this as much as possible. I know there are a lot of people who have already applied and not getting in, but there's a whole lot more who don't know about how great these programs can be for their kids. And science has been known for the past 20 years that this is an indicator. Early on, this can bridge the gap. It can bridge the achievement gap that we have seen so often based on either race or socioeconomic status. And it can be an indicator of who finishes school, who goes to college, and even such severe things as who is the person who is getting in trouble with the law, who is not graduating high school, all of these things. And so it is a massive step towards economic success. It's a great investment for the community. And I think that we should go full bore on pre-K. Thank you.
Thank you all for your thoughtful responses. Unfortunately, we are at time, and so we will not be able to answer all your questions live. However, we hope we will capture all these questions and submit them forward to the candidates, and they can continue to go forward and address those questions that you still have lingering, and be helpful for you to make an informed decision as you go to vote. Early voting does start this Thursday, October 14th. As you guys close out, you will be sent directly to where the polling places are located on your web browser. It will redirect you, and you can get all the information that you need. So we look forward to that. The questions that were submitted to the candidates in advance, we hope that they be willing to share their responses for the questions that we could not yet answer. So thank you all again for coming and joining us tonight. And we hope to continue this conversation, to continue to be in close proximity to each other and addressing these changes that were lifted up in this film, and that these experiences that our young people are experiencing every day, that we are hearing from them and honoring their humanity and dignity as we move forward. So thank you again, and you all have a great night.